spoke just now and asked a question that many of us are asking, which is, why are we still mourning when we have a thriving state of Israel, and you go to Yerushalayim and there are weddings in the streets, and joy and the economy and the military and spirituality and Torah learning are more than ever before? And Esther gave one answer, which is, we still need to learn from the past and not to make the same mistakes. But another answer, a simpler answer, is we still don't have a Bet Hamikdash. And when we think of the Bet Hamikdash, sometimes we focus on sacrifices, what they mean, and how they bring us closer, and how it can be a symbol for this represents me and my guilt and my thanksgiving, and one can bring a lamb and make a sudat todah, and share it with friends and family and poor people, and what kind of joy that would have brought. And then we go directly into Rabbi. He wrote in Mishnah Torah that we're going to have sacrifices, but do we still need sacrifices, and so on and so forth. I'd like to explore today other dimensions of the Bet Hamikdash that often we don't see. And I'd like to start off with a little bit of the architecture, and then some of the other functions, that it was much, much more than korbanot. So we begin on source 1. There are sheets in the back of the chair. Talmud Bavli says, Amri Mishe Lo Ra'a Binyan Hordos, whoever has not seen Herod's building. The Bet Hamikdash is called Herod's building because he was the last to rebuild it. It went through many renovations, like a lot of our Batei Knesiyot. They don't like our Menal this summer, and we start up with a little garage, but you can't find the garage anymore today. And so to the Bet Hamikdash, Herod was a terrible murderer, but what a great builder, and the Rabbi supported his great building nevertheless. He began his building project of the Bet Hamikdash around 20 BCE, and it didn't finish in his lifetime. He died in 4 BCE, and only finished some 40, 50 years later, which means it was actually only up for about 30, 40 years, completed and used. And so when we all look at the models and paintings and pictures of the Bet Hamikdash, Herod's temple, that's only what it looked like at the end. But the rabbis are describing that very one and say, with what did he build it? Rabbi said with stones of white and green marble. And there are those who say built with stones of blue, white, and green marble. Alternate rows of stones, set out an edge a bit and drew in an edge a bit. In other words, there was not like a flat wall, or rather some sticking out, some going in, so that it looked like waves. He considered covering it with gold, but the rabbis told him, leave it and do not cover it, since it is more beautiful this way, as it looks like the waves of the sea. He spent any amount of money. He was willing to cover the entire Bet Hamikdash with gold, but it was actually more beautiful with the blue and white and green, and he consulted his rabbinic staff of architects, which is ironic because he killed all the rabbis, but he left one alive to ask him this question. And so by saying this, the rabbis are saying, despite who Herod was, was the most beautiful building you will ever see. The description we just mentioned is from Talmud Bavli, but we find a similar description in Josephus, who was an eyewitness. He was alive and there during the Bet Hamikdash when it was up and saw its destruction. And so he described its beauty, and he has many chapters describing it. This is just one little bit about the holy house itself, the Hechal, which was placed inside of the innermost court. That most sacred part of the temple was ascended by 12 steps, and in front of it, its height and its breadth were equal, each 100 cubits. And its first gate was 70 cubits, and 25 cubits broad. It goes into a lot of detail. We'll find this in Mishnah, Tractate Midot, which similarly goes into minute detail of every single length and breadth. It shows, I think, the great love that they had for it. When you care about something so much, then you just want to tell about every detail of it. And he says that the front gate had no doors, for it represented the universal visibility of heaven, and that it cannot be excluded from any place. And so he's giving universal symbolism that has to be open all the time. Just like the skies are open and everywhere, so too the Bet Hamikdash symbolizes our entrance point to the spiritual heavens. Its front was covered with gold all over, and through it, the first part of the house and it was more inward, and it appeared. It was very large, so everything looked like it was shining from the gold. And before these doors, there was a veil of equal largeness with the doors, a Babylonian curtain, embroidered with blue and fine linen, scarlet, purple, and of a contexture that was truly wonderful. Nor was this mixture of colors without its mystical interpretation, but it was an image of the universe. By scarlet, there seemed to be enigmatically signified by fire, and by fine flax that represented earth, and blue the air, and the purple the sea. And so interestingly, even though the rabbis never read Josephus, they come to a similar description, that the colors themselves represent the sea and the heavens and the universe. And so the Bet Hamikdash is a kind of a microcosm of the entire universe. And just as the creator of the universe and created the world for us to live in, we build the Bet Hamikdash for Hashem to live in, and that is our meeting place. So that's some of the beauty of the architecture. Of course, there's a lot of beautiful buildings in the world, so this doesn't just end the significance. I do want to read one section where Josephus talks about the destruction. We read Kinot this morning, and Kinot are very moving, but I find it also moving to read Josephus, who was there and himself lamented and described in detail the destruction. While the holy house was on fire, everything was plundered that came to hand, and 10,000 of those that were caught were slain. Nor was there any commiseration of any age or any reverence of gravity, but children, old men, profane persons, priests, were all slain in the same manner. So that this war went round all sorts of men and brought them to destruction. And as well those that made supplication for their lives, and those that defended themselves by fighting. The flame was also carried a long way and made an echo, together with the groans of those that were slain. And because this hill was high, and the works at the temple were very great, one would have thought the whole city had been on fire. No, nor can one imagine anything either greater or more terrible than this noise. It reminds me of during the Second World War, a lot of people in Berlin, in London, and other places that were bombed, remember the noise of the German fighter jets and the bombers. They would swoop down, and the bombs would make a whistling noise, and that was just that was embedded in their memory as something terrible and scary. For there was at once a shout of Roman legions who were marching all together, and a sad clamor of the seditious who were now surrounded with fire and sword. The people also that were left above were beaten back by the enemy, and under a great consternation, and made sad moans and calamity they were under. The multitude also that was in the city joined in this outcry, and those that were upon the hill, and besides many of those that were worn away by famine, and their mouths were closed. But when they saw the fire of the holy house, they exerted their utmost strength, and broke into groans and outcries again. Perea place did also return the echo, as well the mountains all around the city, and augmented the force of the entire noise. Yet was this was the misery itself more terrible than this disaster. For one would have thought that the hill itself on which the temple stood was seething hot, as full of fire on every part of it, that the blood was larger in quantity than the fire, that those that were slain more in number than those that slew them. For the ground did nowhere appear visible for the dead bodies that lay on it. But the soldiers went over heaps of those bodies, and they ran upon such as fled from men. It really could be a kinot. But just like our kinot often end on a note of hope, so too Josephus adds. Now, although anyone would justly lament the destruction of such a work as this was, since it was the most admirable of all the works that we have seen or heard of, both for its curious structure, its magnitude, and for the vast wealth bestowed on it, as well as for the glorious reputation it had for its holiness. Yet might such an one comfort himself with this thought, that it was fate that decreed it be so, which is inevitable both as to living creatures and as to works and places also. However, one cannot but wonder at the accuracy of this period thereto related. For the same month and day were now observed, as said before, when the holy house was burnt formerly by the Babylonians, as saying it's a combination of fate and God's providence that it should be destroyed on the 9th of Av, the very same date as the first Bet Hamikdash. So that's a little bit about the physical building and the experience. A lot of times when we look at the reconstructions, the models of Bet Hamikdash, or pictures of it, there's one thing missing, which is the people. It's like going into Yankee Stadium when it's empty. It doesn't have quite the same feeling as when it's full of fans, 50,000 fans, right? And it comes to life. And I think what reading Josephus, reading the following descriptions, what I'd like to bring out is how was the Bet HaMikdash experienced when it was up and it was used, and what was the experience, therefore, when it was destroyed. So I'd like to next talk about a couple of Mishnayot that I'm picking out of many more that describe the daily rituals. And we'd expect to find in the Mishnah detailed rituals of the Korban Tamid, which is the first Korban, and all the other Korbanot of the day, and the Mincha offerings, and the sin offerings, guilt offerings, and Korban Todah, which are all there in the Mishnah. But this Mishnah starts in the middle of the night, when there is nothing going on in the Bet HaMikdash, and you think it would just be empty, and nobody there. But it tells us not so. בשלושה מקומות הכהנים שומרים בבית המקדש, בבית הבתינס, בבית הניצוץ, בבית המוקד. There were three places where the Kohanim, they were keeping watch all night. One in the south, two in the north, in these chambers. And the Leviim further had 21 other places where they were the watchmen. So 24 altogether, having watchmen everywhere. And there was an officer called Ish HaBayit. And he would go around to every single watch, and he had lit torches in front of him so that he knows where he's going and people know that he's coming. And if any of the watchers did not rise at his approach, the officer, he's like the chief of security of the Bet HaMikdash, if he did not rise and say, "Shalom to you, officer of the Temple Mount," it was obvious that the watchman was asleep. And so the officer used to beat him with his rod. And he had permission to burn his clothes. Why burn his clothes? Well, he's wearing a uniform, and I guess if he's not using his uniform correctly, he's not functioning and fulfilling his duty, then he doesn't deserve his uniform. It's like asking, a cop that did something wrong to give him his badge and his gun. And the others would say, "What is that noise in the courtyard?" And they would answer, "It's the cry of the Levi who was being beaten, and his clothes are being burned because he was asleep at his watch." And this is not just theoretical. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, once my uncle was found to be asleep, and they burned, not while he's in it, they took off his clothes and then burned him. So this is very interesting because it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah and Tanakh that you have to have 24 guards all night. It doesn't say that you beat them up if you don't find them. Well, why do we need to know this? Right? Does this really happen? And what is the significance of all this detail? So we can figure out part of it. I think whenever you have a glorious building, it's not the same living in a building with a doorman as living without a doorman. And I think of the Queen's Palace in London, and if you just buy it and go and be empty and dark, it wouldn't be glorious as it is when you have the guards there 24/7, and you go and watch the changing of the guards, right? There's always someone there, and this is an important place. It needs to be guarded all the time. And just like the guard in front of the Queen's Palace is not really warding off enemies, right? I don't think he's trained for that. You're just standing in place more for an honor guard, right? Just last week when it was 120 degrees, right? He can't move his head, so they had to give him a straw so he could sip some water so he doesn't faint onto the big hat. And so in the Bet HaMikdash as well, we want to show its glory, and so we want to have watchmen there all day and all night. But we still I haven't explained what all this detail is. But we're going to go to the next scene. This is the Mishnah in Masechet Tamid, which describes now in the Bet HaMikdash, interestingly, the Kohanim who were going to serve on that next day would be sleeping in the Bet HaMikdash. The guards couldn't sleep, but the Kohanim could. There was a place called Bet HaMoked, the chamber of the hearth. There was a fireplace there to keep the Kohanim warm all night. And Bayit Gadol had a dome and no second floor. It was a large room. And all along the sides, there were stone benches on which the elder Kohanim would sleep. They were holding on to the keys of the temple courtyard. In other words, they're ready to open it in the morning. They have their keys in hand. Reminds me, when I was in Israel for the year, one of the things they did with the 18-year-old Americans is they gave us all M16s. I don't think I told my mom this when I was there. And they gave us 9 practice shots. Okay, now you're experts. Now you know how to fight. And so so they had a bulletin board and said, you have to guard the yishuv, alon shavut. You get the 3 in the morning, 3 to 6 in the morning, you have to walk around the yishuv and make sure, no terrorists come in. And so they give you an M16 the night before you go to sleep. And you can't just leave it around because someone can take it, right? They test you out. If they're able to sneak into your room and take your M16, you're in trouble. So you have to actually, hug it while you're sleeping and make sure that no one takes it. And you have to be half awake, half asleep, half awake, right? Ready at 3 in the morning to go and guard. And we did. We walked around the yeshiva for 3 hours. The terrorists came. What would we do? I have no idea. Thankfully, no terrorists came. But you have the same sense of anticipation that they're sleeping there with the keys in their hands. And the young Kohanim also were going to serve the next day. They wouldn't get the benches, they would sleep on the floor. And they had their clothing, their uniforms next to them. Right, they would fold up their uniform and put it under their heads, or next to their heads like a pillow, and they would cover themselves with their regular clothing. And now, in the morning, the first thing that was done is to clean off the ashes on the altar. Things were burning on the altar all night, so you've got to clean off the ashes. Seems like a menial job. Nobody would want to do that, but actually, it was very coveted, and the Kohanim would, at first they had a race to see who would get to do it. They'd race up the ramp, the fastest one to get there first would do it. That didn't work out well when one Kohen, a little overzealous, pushed the other one off the ramp, broke his leg, and so they said, from now on, we're just going to use a lottery. And so whoever wanted to, a chance in the lottery, would wake up extra early, and go into the mikveh. Before the Memuneh comes, the Memuneh is the superintendent. He's in charge, he directs all the traffic in the Bet Hamikdash. I'm getting somewhere with all this. It's not just detail for detail's sake. Although, that's what it reads like in the Mishnah. And asks, what time does the superintendent arrive? He doesn't sleep, he sleeps outside in Jerusalem, and he comes in the morning. And says, and he doesn't always come at the same time. Sometimes he comes right around when the rooster crows, sometimes a little before, sometimes a little after. And we're reading this and like, well, why do I need to know the exact details of the alarm clock and the schedule of the superintendent, right? None of this is in the Torah, none of this is prescribed rituals, it doesn't really matter. And then so the superintendent comes and knocks on the chamber door where the Kohanim are sleeping. And they open the door. Okay, we know that. He says, whoever is ready, whoever went to the mikveh and is dressed in his uniform should come, and he can take part in the lottery. Yafisu, Zacha, Misha Zacha, and whoever merited got to do it. Okay, so it goes on like this, and generations of commentaries are wondering, what is this whole story about? Why is it telling us all these details? And why do we need to know all of this? And recently, a book about the Mishnah came out. It's called Mishpat HaMishnah, the soul of the Mishnah, analyzing some of the deeper spiritual values embedded in the details of the Mishnah, and argues that actually there are many textual and idea references to Shir HaShirim in these Mishnayot. And this is key to understanding what the Bet Hamikdash service was all about, and therefore what we've lost. First of all, we see that there's a connection between the Bet Hamikdash and Shir HaShirim and the Mishnah and Masechet Ta'anit that we make reference to every time we take out a Sefer Torah in our Batei Knesset today. It says, the maidens of Zion, go and look at King Solomon and the crowns that his mother gave him on his wedding day and the gladness of his heart. Right, till today, every Shabbat, every day, we say this, right when we remove the Torah and give it to the person carrying it. Well, why? Why do we talk about King Solomon's wedding? What does that have to do with taking out the Torah? The Midrash says, B'yom Chatunato ze matan Torah, or B'yom Simchat Libo ze binyan Bet Hamikdash yibana b'mehera b'yameinu. That the wedding day is referring to the giving of the Torah, and his day of joy is the building of the Bet Hamikdash. Hamikdash. In other words, Shir HaShirim is not talking about King Solomon himself, but King Shalom, the king who has all the peace with him, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore the wedding day is actually referring to the wedding, the joining of the covenant between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Bnei Israel, which is the giving of the Torah. The Torah is our Ketubah document that shows the mutual responsibilities. And the Nisuin, when the husband brings the bride into his home, that is the building of the Bet HaMikdash, when we come together and we meet and see the face of the Almighty in the Bet HaMikdash. So we see already that Shir HaShirim is all an allegory to that meeting of the Shekhinah in the Bet HaMikdash. In fact, Rabbi Akiva doubled down on this, and while the other rabbis were fighting and saying, I don't know, is this book holy, is that book holy, does it belong in Tanakh, Kohelet, I don't know, in Megillat Esther, doesn't have God's name in it. Shir HaShirim, it reads like a kind of PG-13 love poem. I don't know if it belongs in it, but Rabbi Akiva says, no one ever disputed Shir HaShirim. In fact, the whole world is not worthy of the day that which Shir HaShirim was given to Israel, because all the other writings are just Kodesh. But Shir HaShirim is Kodesh, Kodeshim, using the word describing the innermost sanctuary of the Bet HaMikdash, the Kodesh Kodeshim. So now, let's fill out the connection. What is the connection between the detailed nighttime and morning rituals of the Bet HaMikdash and the words in Shir HaShirim? And so we go to the famous scene in Shir HaShirim chapter 5 that says, Ani Yeshena, v'debi kol dodi dovek, pitfi li achoti ra'ayati yonati tamati, sheroshi nimnatal kibusotai resise layla. And you have the beloved who's sleeping, but her heart is awake. She's awake in excitement and anticipation. She's half sleeping, half awake. And sure enough, just then, her dream comes true. She's been dreaming about her beloved. And he comes, and he knocks on the door, and he says, open up for me, right? My beloved, my perfect one, because apparently it's raining outside, and his hair is all wet. And she is lying in bed, and she says, I already took off my clothes, I'm going to get dressed again now. I already washed my feet. How am I going to go and get muddy again? I'm too lazy. It's kind of paradoxical and strange. What do you mean? This is her dream, it's there at the door. Why is she so lazy? Is she anxious? Maybe he's going to reject her. Maybe it won't work out. Maybe something that's so great that he shouldn't have the courage. Or maybe she doesn't think she's good. Maybe she's hearing things. Next scene, in those days the doors had holes in them because you can only open it from one side, you need the key. And so he put his hand in the door to try to open it. And her insides were longing for him. But she finally gets up. She finally gets up out of bed and she goes to open the door, and the burr represents her desire, her longing. But as soon as I opened it, he was gone. And I went around looking for him, and I couldn't find him anymore. She missed her opportunity. And now she goes out into the streets, and she's asking around that, and anybody seen? Right? This is what he looks like. It describes him. And the guards of the city find her, and they're like, there's a curfew out. What are you doing out here? What kind of a woman of the night are you? And these are not very nice guards. And they beat her, and they strip her, the guards of the walls. Okay, notice any similarities? So the guards are being beaten, right? And so you have the guards of the city, and the guards of Yerushalayim are both here. The officer in charge of the guards, if he sees any of them sleeping on the job, then he beats them and removes their clothes. He burns them also, he'll burn them here, right? And so you have to be on watch and not be sleeping when the officer comes, and make sure that you better be up. And furthermore, this ritual of, we're not sure when the Mimuneh will come, when the superintendent will come. Superintendent is representing, he's not God himself, but he's representing the beginning of the service of the day. And are you looking forward to being able to start the first Korban Tamid and be able to get up and invite the Shekhinah to come into the Bet HaMikdash, to come into our own lives at the beginning of the service of the day? We never know what's going to be, and the night could be long, and the night is also symbolic of a time when we feel far away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we don't know what's going to happen. And so the Kohanim, they wake up early, and they get dressed, and they bathe, and they're ready at the door standing. Whenever the knock comes, they are ready to open it. So unlike Shir HaShirim, where she's lazy, she doesn't know, I don't know if it's time, I don't know if I should, by the time she gets there, she missed the opportunity. The service in the Bet HaMikdash and the Mishnah's description of the details of the service are a reenactment of the scene of Shir HaShirim. But this time, we're up early, and we're ready, and when the knock comes, we go and we continue with even the menial cleaning off of the Mizbeach. That's a great thing to do. It's like the Rabbi in the morning comes, opens the shul, and he sets up the chairs, and he sees doing menial work, but he loves doing it because he knows in just a moment everyone's going to come in, and we're going to have prayers, and we're going to be able to connect with the Almighty. And the excitement there is a rectification of the laziness of the beloved in Shir HaShirim. So I think this gives us a little bit of the sense of what it meant to be in the Bet HaMikdash. Rabbi again, who author of this book, writes, the pinnacle of the relationship with God, the consummation of the love and intimacy described in the Song of Songs is attained by way of clearing the ashes, a mundane action, seemingly tantamount to taking out the garbage. That such significance attached to such a trivial action shows us that more important than the external actions and the rituals they entail is the feeling that underlies them, and that the Holy One, blessed be He, requires the heart. Now that I mentioned Shir HaShirim, I have to quote one paragraph from Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik called Dodi Dofek. It's a magisterial essay that he wrote just a few years after the Holocaust. And he talks about the knocks on the door that our beloved are knocking. And I'll read to you a little bit because it's directly here. And if you're wondering, how could it be that the beloved is staying in bed when her boyfriend is right outside? What do you mean you're lazy and not doing anything? Here's what he writes. 8 years ago, in the midst of the night of terrors of Majdanek, Treblinka, Buchenwald, in a night of gas chambers and crematorium, in a night of total divine self-concealment, in a night ruled by the devil of doubt and destruction, who sought to sweep the lover from her own tent, in a night of continuous searching for the beloved. On that very night, the beloved appeared, the Almighty, who was hiding in his splendid sanctum, suddenly appeared and began to beckon at the tent of the lover, who tossed and turned on her bed, beset by convulsions and the agonies of hell. Because of the beating and knocking at the door of the mournful lover, the state of Israel was born. How many times did the beloved knock at the door of the lover? It appears to me that we can count at least 6 knocks. And he goes on and talks about the knock of politics, that amazingly the UN, the only thing they've ever agreed on in the history is to create the state of Israel, both Russia and America. He talks about the knocking of the military that miraculously won the war. The knock of theology that for 2,000 years Christianity looked at the Jews and says, see, God has left you, and the proof is, look how downtrodden you are. They're the ones that are doing the persecution. And now we're ascendant and we have our state back. And this is a rejection of all those 2,000 years of Christian persecution. And he goes on talking about the call of the state of Israel. That's our beloved knocking at the door. And so if you're wondering, how could the beloved be sleeping in bed when, her longing, her dream is right there at the door? Well, why are we still here? I'm not going to answer that question. I'm here because I have to encourage you all to go to Israel. I'll be the last time. Jackie's almost done. Okay, so here we have a sense of not just Israel, but the Bet HaMikdash at the pinnacle of Israel and what it meant. It goes on, I'll read the next ones quickly. And it talks about how then, as they opened the doors of the chamber, the Kohanim would go out and they would go all around the courtyard, one to the right and one to the left, and they'd meet in the middle and make sure everything was in order so that the preparation for the day would all continue as planned. So that describes the Kohanim. And I think this is a good sense of avodah, that sacrifice was not just a technical thing. The problem is that many people saw it as just a technicality. Oh, I can go sin, and I'll come to the Beit HaMikdash and give sacrifices. That's Chazon Yeshayahu. That was the problem. But when done well, the service of the Beit HaMikdash not only symbolized, but reified, concretized that love between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and His nation on a daily basis. So I talked about avodah. I'd like to talk about Gemilut Chasadim. And I don't know if we usually think about Beit HaMikdash as a center for Gemilut Chasadim, but I think it is. And talk about the national experience. What does it mean for a non-Kohen, just a regular person, to go visit the Beit HaMikdash? What would they see there, and what would they do? And so nowadays we have a little semblance of it when you go to the Kotel, and you have minyanim from every different nusach in the world, and you're in the cacophony of it, but you're saying amen to 10 different minyanim at the same time. But it's so beautiful to see Jews from everywhere. It's like the one place that this is our center, everyone comes to. And in those times as well, when one went up onto the Temple Mount, there was an order, and it says, Kol hanichnasim, source 11. Anyone wanted to come and visit up to the Temple Mount, he would enter a gate and he would turn right, and he would go around counterclockwise and go around and circumambulate the Beit HaMikdash itself. There were a couple of exceptions though, and someone who had something happen to them, they would enter and turn left, and they would go around clockwise. So who would do this? Really small. Well, when they were going the wrong way, the other way, people would see them and say, why are you going the other way? And the person may answer, Shani Abel, because I'm in mourning. And the person who's going counterclockwise would respond and say, Hashofen b'bayit hazeh yinachameka. He who dwells in this place should give you comfort. Or a person might be excommunicated. He did something wrong, the rabbis banned him. And so he'll say, Shani minudeh. And then the other visitors would tell him, may the sages reconvene and find a way to bring you back. And other sources talk about how if you have someone loved one who's sick, and you're really worried and distressed about it, so also you would walk clockwise. And then people would meet you and say, why are you walking clockwise? And you'd say, oh, my relative is sick. And they would say, he who dwells in this place should give him mercy. May he get better soon. Or even if you just lost something. I lost my necklace. And people would go around and say, I hope whoever found it will return it to you. And so what you see here is that this is a place of national Gemilut Chasadim. Anyone who had a problem, who didn't quite fit into the mainstream, when someone's in mourning or they're excommunicated, they don't feel part of the community. They're distressed, or someone's sick. They can't join in the happiness with everybody else. But this is a way of showing, I have something bothering me, an invitation for people to ask, what's wrong? An opportunity for them to make a prayer. So a little story. 16 years ago, I lost my sister. And during the month of mourning, we decided to take a family trip to Israel for some spiritual nourishment that we needed. And we went up to Hidary. Who here has been up to Hidary? Okay, relatively few people. So I encourage it, it's permitted, according to most rabbis. You have to go to BeAb before, you can't wear leather shoes, you're already doing that. And we decided to go up, and one wonderful, amazing experience, and we went up because we were mourning, so we turned left and we went clockwise. And just happened to be, unplanned, there was a group of yeshiva students from the yeshiva I went to, the one that I guarded with my M16, from Yeshivat Eretz Zion, with Rabbi Shlomo Levi, one of my teachers. And he had a group, and they were also up, but they had nothing wrong that happened, and so they were walking counterclockwise. And we met in the middle. And they asked, why are you walking that way? And we said, because Rabbi knew. And he said, Hashochen b'bayit hazeh yinachameka. He who dwells in this place should give you comfort. And it was one of the most comforting moments, because we were up there at the Beit HaMikdash. It's probably the first time in 2,000 years that anyone has been able to fulfill this very mission. And that gave me a small sense of what it was like and what we've lost in not having a national center of Gemilut Hasadim. We have local centers, we have SBH, and every community has their places. But one place where all of Israel goes for comfort, for healing, to find something they lost, to feel part of something bigger, that was all in Bet HaMikdash. And that's something we lost and we cry for today. I'd like to end with one last aspect of the Bet HaMikdash. We talked about Avodah, we talked about Gemilut Chasadim, but there's one more pillar of the earth, and that is Torah. And I won't read this inside, I'll just describe to you that the Bet HaMikdash was also the seat of the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin. They were in a chamber that actually jutted right into the Chatzer, and although in the Chatzer only Kohanim can go, it's an entrance from outside, so that anyone who had business dealings or anything questioned can go there from outside the Chatzer, even though they're actually in the Chatzer, or from the outside door. And they would oversee everything in the temple. In addition, they were the Supreme National Court. And so the Tosefta here describes that if you don't know, if you have a question, a halachic question, you couldn't go to Google back then. But rather you'd go to your local court of 3 judges and ask them, what's the law? And if they knew, they would say. And if they didn't know, they would say, well, we have to go to the next bigger city. And they have a bigger court, we'll ask them. And if they don't know, then the judge from the first court would go together with the questioner. And the judge from that court, they would go to the court of 23 judges. That was the next highest place. And if they didn't know also, they would all go to Jerusalem, right? The original questioner. And the head of each court, of lower court, and on Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, there were 3 courts. The lowest one, they would ask them if they don't know. They'd go to the next highest one that's right at the edge of the ramparts of the Bet HaMikdash. And if they don't know, then all of those chief judges, so you have to imagine, it's growing and growing, this group, and representing all the cities and all the levels along the way would go to the Sanhedrin all together and said, this questioner here has an inquiry, and we don't know the answer. And then they go to the court of 71 judges. The picture here on your handout is an actual Sanhedrin from the time of Napoleon. Napoleon reconstituted the Sanhedrin. It lasted about a couple of years. And they answered some important questions. Separate story. And they would deliberate. If they knew the answer, tell them. If not, they would argue and they would vote. And whatever they voted, that would be the law for all of Israel. And because of that, Barishana, lo hayu machalakot b'Yisrael, there was no controversy. There were no factions in Israel. It wasn't like this morning when half the people are putting tefillin at home, and half are coming in, and some are putting talet, no tefillin, some tefillin, no talet. People don't know what to do. People are coming late. People are leaving early. And the people ask me every year, what should we do? I tell them, they say, no, but we don't do that. So why'd you ask me in the first place? You weren't going to listen to me anyway. And part of the feeling of Tish'a BeAb is, I think it's appropriate that no one knows what the custom is, right? And then we get to the Kinah, nobody knows the tune, right? And whenever you see division, machlok, and the different communities doing different things, when you say, are we one nation? And we're fractured. Until today, we're still fractured. But at the time of the Bet HaMikdash, we had the Sanhedrin. We had a high court, we had the legislative body, that was the light for all of Israel. And their law went out to everybody from there. And that's something that wasn't the Bet HaMikdash, that's something that we're missing. And that is another reason for us to cry. I'll end with BeAb. I referenced already, Shimon HaTzadik lived in the middle of the second Bet HaMikdash. הוא היה אומר השלושה דברים העולם אומר, על התורה, על העבודה, ועל גמילות חסדים לתורה, the whole world. And the world, remember that the Bet HaMikdash represents the world in its architecture. It's blue and it's green. And it all rests on 3 things, Torah, the Sanhedrin, Avodah, the place of sacrifices and worship, and the place where we wake up in the morning and are eager to greet and show that love of Shir HaShirim between God and His nation. Gemilut Chasadim, the national place of comfort and prayer for everyone who's in any kind of distress. And with the destruction of Bet HaMikdash, the 3 pillars of the world are gone, which means the world is threatened to topple. What do we do without Bet HaMikdash? And so at the end of BeAb, the very same chapter, chapter 1, Mishnah 18, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, he's living after the destruction of Bet HaMikdash, and says, Al Shlosha Devim Ha'olam Omer, the world rests upon 3 pillars. But don't worry, even if we don't have the original three, we don't have Bet HaMikdash, the world will not fall, because he replaces them with Al-Hadin, Al-Ha'emet, Al-Shalom, on justice, on truth, and peace. Shene'emad, Emet, Mishpat Shalom, Shiftu B'sha'arechem, go and execute judgment, the truth, and peace in your gates. In your gates is something that you can do everywhere you want. And so the rabbis come together and they say, although we don't have a Bet HaMikdash with the Avodah, we can replace it with Tefillah. We don't have a national place of Gemilut Chasadim, but you know what? Avadim will come everywhere in every Bet Knesset and Bet Abel, and everyone will come and visit them and comfort them. And although we don't have one Sanhedrin, we'll build Beit Mikdash in every place and local courts, and we'll uphold as much as we can Torah as well, and we'll execute judgment. And we will continue in that way until such time as we're ready, and then the Bet HaMikdash can be rebuilt. The pasuk in Zechariah, the very next pasuk is Ha'aman Adonai Sevaot, Som HaRevi'i, V'Som HaChamishi, V'Som HaShevi'i, V'Som HaAsri'i El Bet Yehuda, V'Sason U'Simcha, U'Moadim Tovim, V'Amet V'Shalom Ehavu. That this very fast day, on the 5th month, will go from a day of fasting to a day of feasting, and this Mishnah is giving us the way forward. If I could give one analogy, it's like a self-driving car. Right? A self-driving car. If you don't know how to drive, you can't use it. I have a 17-year-old learning how to drive. I won't let him use the features because that's dangerous. If you already know how to drive, then you can use the features, it'll help you out. And the problem when we had the Bet HaMikdash is we weren't driving ourselves. We were using the Bet HaMikdash as just a symbol, just a shortcut. We weren't doing the hard work of Gemilut Chasadim, of Torah, of Avodah. It was not internalized. We're using it in place of we come and trample the courtyards. We can go murder and steal, and we come here and we think everything will be gone. It's precisely when we learn to train ourselves without a Bet HaMikdash, and we can achieve the 3 pillars on our own, then we will be worthy to have the rebuilding of the Bet HaMikdash. May it happen soon in our days.